Emily Dickinson is considered the mother of American poetry, despite having only 10 of her poems published in her lifetime. Most of her work was not published until after her death in 1886. She had requested that all her poems be burned upon her death, but her sister instead compiled and published them, and they were received to great critical success. Her poems were unconventional and innovative. She focused on contrasting themes of death and pain and nature and the hopeful feelings it invokes. She lived most of her adult life in privacy and is thought of by most to be this quiet hermit whose entire life was sheltered, even though she had many friends in her younger years and kept some of these friendships in her adult life. Emily lived a mysterious life, and there is not much information about her, but her work is revered by casual readers and critics alike. So what do we know about Emily Dickinson's life, work, and the themes that she conveyed in her poems? Emily was born December 10, 1830, in Amherst, Massachusetts. Her parents were Edward and Emily Dickinson, and she had one brother and one sister. As a child, she was inquisitive and loved reading. In her younger years, she attended Amherst Academy, beginning at age 10. There she made some lasting friendships and overall had a happy and social childhood. At the age of 16, she attended Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. This was the first time Emily had been away from her home, and she struggled with her new surroundings. At Mount Holyoke, she was conflicted with her beliefs, and she resisted the Puritan ideas taught to her. The school expected the students to declare their dedication to God. Emily, however, could not do this, and she spent only 1 year at this institute. She later wrote, "Christ is calling everyone here, and I am standing alone in rebellion." This may have led to increasing feelings of isolation. Another factor might have been the strange relationship she had with her parents. Emily's father was a congressman and treasurer of Amherst College, the college Emily's grandfather had founded in 1821. Emily's mother stayed at home with the children, as was customary of the time. However, it is believed that she suffered from depression and would spend much of her time in her room away from her children. This most likely contributed to the fact that Emily was not very fond of her mother. She even wrote to a friend that she had no mother, and on another occasion confessed that she had never gone to her mother for anything when she was in trouble. After leaving Mount Holyoke, Emily spent her time like most young women of that era. She went to parties, on carriage rides, and socialized with many of her friends from Amherst. It was about this time that she began seriously writing poetry. Her brother Austin, whom she was close to, also wrote poetry and would show it to his father, who in turn was proud of his son's writing. Emily kept her poems to herself, and perhaps she did so because she thought her father would dislike her work and didn't want to compete with her brother for her father's approval. At about age 20, Emily became good friends with Susan Gilbert, who would later marry Austin and become Emily's sister-in-law. Emily made a great effort to treat Susan as a sister in spirit. After Susan and Austin married, they lived next door to Emily and her sister Lavinia, and the two women were in each other's homes all the time. Emily shared over 300 of her poems with Susan. Unfortunately, as Susan's life became busier with the tasks of being a wife and mother, the two women grew apart and even had an argument that split their strained relationship even more. After this, Emily and her sister reverted to a more isolated life. Both Emily and her sister were never married and lived out their lives in spinsterhood. Because of this, people in Amherst thought they were odd. Some believe Emily wore only white, which added to her peculiarities. Emily would spend the rest of her life in her home and would never go out and socialize. Despite her reclusive lifestyle, she had some friends that she corresponded with on a regular basis. She would live to be 56 years old and most likely died from heart failure or a brain hemorrhage. Few of Emily's poems were published in her lifetime, and these were published anonymously and were often changed by the publishers, which made Emily furious. She penned nearly 1,800 poems, but because of the editing by publishers, she chose to withdraw to her room and write her poetry for herself alone, never pursuing fame as a poet while alive. One of her most famous works is "Because I Could Not Stop for Death," and it goes, Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves, and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. We passed the school, where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain, we passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews stood quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then 'tis centuries, and yet feel shorter than the day. I felt surmise the horses' heads were toward eternity. Other famous works she had were I Am Nobody, Who Are You? I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died, and a Bird Came Down the Walk. Emily had a singular style that was unconventional, using meter patterns that sound a lot like Protestant hymns, with one line of 8 syllables, followed by another line of 6 syllables. This is repeated to form an 8-6-8-6 pattern. She also breaks with this pattern by slowing down the rhythms, and sometimes inserts her signature dashes that interrupt the rhythm altogether. The dashes seem to help the reader get a better understanding of the emotions she wants to convey in the poem. She also used these dashes in her personal correspondences, which seems to suggest that she used the dashes to act as inflection. Her handwritten poems show dashes of varying sizes. While some are slanted, others are completely vertical. Other works she uses perfect rhymes, however, in other instances she uses imperfect rhymes. She would also throw in a random capitalization to emphasize certain words. These are all staples of her unique writing style. Her unpredictable lyric poems have become much more popular than she could have ever hoped or thought. The themes in her work vary. Emily loved working in her garden and loved nature in general, and she wrote about it. But she also had a preoccupation with death and religious themes. Her poem, I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died, is an example of one of her poems that features themes of death and religion. Nature is What I See is an example of her nature-based poems. This poem has a much airier and lighter tone than I Heard a Fly Buzz. If you were to read all her poems in order, you would find her early work to be light and bright, but shortly after her 13th birthday, about the same time the Civil War broke out, her poems took a darker turn. During this time was also when she wrote the large majority of her work, including some of her best poems. Emily's life was one of mystery and seclusion. Her work was innovative and new, while still holding deep meaning that people are still talking about today.